Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main entrance doors. The Opens Meeting Act is also posted on the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Agenda item 2, discussion. Before we move to agenda item 2.1, I have had a request from a board member that wants to speak, to say something. Go ahead, Robin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we were in our committee meeting with the Teaching, Learning, and Serving, this thought kept coming to me that self-analysis is sometimes very, very difficult, but most always becomes very beneficial. And as I think about the things that our committee talked about, while maybe difficult and at certain times even bordering on taking it personally, I understand those things. But in the end, I really believe that our discussion will end in a very productive time for all of us. So I just wanted to make sure that I just wanted people to think about and maybe share in some of my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. Agenda item 2.1, board discussion on content area standards process. And before we start this, I would like to just read what I sent out to the board earlier this week to outline this discussion. The State Board of Education discussed at the October board meeting the possibility of the president forming an ad hoc committee to address the process of the health standards when they are discussed in the future. As president, I reviewed the conversation thoroughly from last month's meeting more than once to ensure including thoughts and considerations should an ad hoc committee be formed by myself. As president, I have officially named 3 board members to an ad hoc committee of the content area standards process. Chair, Jacqueline Morrison, Robin Stevens, and Patty Goebbels. I am currently seeking a report, as your current president, from the ad hoc committee no later than January 25th, 2022, to the leadership at that time. The committee will report to the full board in February with possible action taken at the March meeting, presenting any recommendations for standards process, policy, or procedural rules implementation. And I have asked that board members have conversations in their committees today, and mainly so that information that they would like to share out for the ad hoc committee to consider as they begin their work here in the very near future. So that's why these discussions took place, and I appreciate everyone's due diligence in your communication in your committees. And so with that, we will start off with hearing from our 2 committees. And do I start with Patsy or do I start with Lisa? I can always...
Okay.
Patsy, are you okay with starting?
She's vice president, so.
She's vice president. There you go. That's a great reason.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline because Jacqueline took notes while we all discussed and discussed and discussed.
Good.
And so she said, since she had the notes and they were scribbled, we would look at her notes and listen to her, and then feel free to add.
Okay. Jacqueline, go ahead.
Okay. Before I get started, I just want to also echo Robin's comments. I think one of the things that we did in our committee that Patsy had us do was we basically looked at each other and complimented each other on the things that we thought the other person did well. And I thought that worked really, really well in our committee. And so I would suggest that if things get a little heated or tough here that we try to do that if we need to. So we started out with the question, what went well in past standards? There were two contexts in which we looked at past standards. One was the social studies standards, and the other was the fine arts standards. And some of the things that we thought went well, so social studies, the name I'm not familiar with, but other committee members were, was Harris Payne. He was consulted on the social studies standards, and I believe he was the social studies content specialist at the department. The advisory group that he worked with was used in every step of the process. And so making sure that the advisory group is a part of the process. It was also commented that he worked to get new people at the table to ensure diversity on the team and diversity of thought. Another comment was that there was a lot of work done on the front end of those standards. So by the time that those standards made it to the board, the problems and concerns had been mitigated. And as a result, there was not great public backlash to those standards. The other consideration was the fine arts standards. One of the great things that we thought came from the fine arts standards were there were a lot of public meetings held across the state with many stakeholders. So people from across the state were able to weigh in. There was also a survey that was not just electronic, but I believe was also a paper survey that could be answered by anyone. And so that survey was accessible to all and able to be answered by the general public and all stakeholders. That got us to the next question of what were the challenges in the current health standards? I will go through these. This is in no particular order. Number one, there were no steps leading up to the health standards getting to the board. 2, there were no steps which led to a lack of transparency in the process. The process should have been more inclusive. It should have been more inclusive of the board, teachers, and the advisory committee. We as a board didn't know who was responsible, and we didn't know who was responsible for what parts of the standards. There was a feeling that there was a protection of the status quo. This is how we've always done things. A protection of leadership, that we as a board protected leaders instead of the process. There was a lot of finger pointing. There was also a lot of blind trust, just trusting that people would do, trusting in a process that maybe didn't even exist. Some people felt there was a lack of honesty. Number 6, we didn't have a written process for the standards. Number 7, there was a culture on the board of following staff. Number 8, at the end of it, the board took the heat, not the commissioner. There was a lack of nimbleness. We weren't able to be nimble. And the last, number 10, there were committee members, whether of the writing committee or the advisory committee, who felt like they were not involved in the process. That's not me. Good. So that got us to our next question. What do we see as the roles and responsibilities of each of the following groups in the standards process? The Board of Education. These are not set in stone, but are thoughts and ideas that we were coming up with and as we were exploring what the roles and responsibilities could or should be. The Board of Education should be a participant in the developing, the Board of Education should be a participant in developing and participating in the process, in the development of a standards process. There was even a mention that possibly we should look at hiring a consultant to see what best practices are in developing a standards process. The board should have oversight of the standards as they're being written. The board should be able to approve the writing and advisory committees. The board should review the process for each standard process. So to give that context, writing of fine art standards might be a little different than the writing of math standards. And so we would look at the process that's been developed, and before we start the new development of a writing process for new standards or the updating, we'd see if that process worked well for math or if it worked well for reading. And if not, we'd adjust it. We would get updates on the progress of the standards as they are developed, we meaning the board. And the board would control the release of standards to the media, not staff or the commissioner. The Teaching and Learning Committee, what do we see as the role and responsibility of the Teaching and Learning Committee? They would be initially, we thought they would be the first board members to see the standards and offer feedback and input. That got us to the Policy Committee, and we actually thought that part of the committees on that list of roles and responsibility should also include the AQuESTT Committee, not just Teaching and Learning Committee and Policy Committee. Which got us to the question of, should the standards process start with the Teaching and Learning Committee, or should it actually start with the AQuESTT Committee? And it got us thinking that we needed to really reflect and think about, what is the purpose of the standards? Are the standards there as a component of teaching, or are they there as a component of student success? And if they're there as a component of student success, then should the AQuESTT Committee be looking at it, and should they also be the first to look at it? And so maybe in these things we need to really determine, what's the priority? Is it students, teachers, both? Or where should it start? But we do agree that the Teaching and Learning Committee should look at the standards. We agree that the Policy Committee should look at the standards, and we'd like for AQuESTT to be added to this list. What is the role of the commissioner? We see the role of the commissioner as the oversight of staff who are working on the standards, to ensure that the written policy that's drafted and the procedures are followed, to compile and research best practices, and to educate board members, committees, and stakeholders of that information, possibly make that information accessible to the public, being the repository of those best practices in that field. Also, handling public relations in terms of, what does the rollout look like? Are school districts updated? Are superintendents notified? Are stakeholders engaged? Agency staff. We see the role of agency staff as to carry out the duties of the commissioner. They should organize and coordinate stakeholder and committee meetings. They should be the conduit to filling those committee positions. Other questions asked on that is, should we pay committee members? Should we offer them a stipend for their time so that we're actually getting the most qualified people in the state? We also see the role of agency staff to organize public sessions across the state, public listening sessions. The role of the writing committee. We had a conversation about, does there need to be collaboration between the writing committee and the content area experts so that there's a nexus between the two? As far as the writing committee, as we started thinking about what their roles and responsibilities are, we actually had a set of questions that we thought the board should consider as we look at the roles and responsibilities of the writing committee. So one, what are they doing with the knowledge that they get from these stakeholders? Once the writing committee gets that expert knowledge, what do they do with it? Is it their role to take the information and put it in a standard format for teaching? Are they interpreting what those standards would look like in a classroom? How much discretion does the writing committee have? Do they get to eliminate some of the information that the experts provided? Do they get to add to? Do they get to change? Exactly how much discretion do they have? Here, we did not have specific answers, only points of thought that we should consider as we move forward. For the content area advisors, we thought that their role and responsibility is to make sure that we're following best practices, to make sure that we have the most up-to-date research, and to keep us as the state of Nebraska up to date on topics. We believe they should be able to testify and present to the board the information that they have. And we felt that our role and responsibility as a board is to protect those content area experts, to make sure that their information is not released, that they don't become subject to criticism, subject to any type of backlash that may come from them being a participant for us. Stakeholders, we believe their role and responsibility is to provide input into the process, and it's our role and responsibility to make sure that they have a method and means to do so. We had additional information to consider and discuss, and I left those notes that I wrote on paper, I think with my pizza box. So I have to bring up the form that was sent. I do remember the answer, so just if you give me a second, I'll pull that up. Sorry, guys. Okay. All right. So additional information to consider and discuss. The topic was consideration of a timeline. And we thought that there definitely should be a timeline established for the rollout of standards. Will the health standards process be put in policy? And this was actually, I think, amended and should be, will any standards process be put into policy? And we thought absolutely there needs to be a policy and procedure for standards. The next question for consideration was, should the board have an opportunity to discuss the draft with the writing team before stakeholder input? And if you gathered from our statements about board roles and responsibilities that we discussed, we absolutely believe that the board should have an opportunity during multiple times during the process to provide input. And that would be through that policy committee, the teaching committee, through the AQuESTT committee, and also through the full board. What will the public rollout of the standards look like? We believe that there should always be a concerted or a very intentional rollout of the standards. It should happen to the public after a vote by this full board, but also as we are looking at any standards, we think there should be a very intentional rollout and public media just kind of not campaign, but in the sense of political campaign, but just a very thoughtful process. And that was listed in our thoughts for the role of the commissioner when I mentioned a public relations consideration. The next question is, upon stakeholder review, who reviews the considerations given? And we thought that would be a combination of people, particularly the board would have an opportunity to review it, but also the experts who would then transmit that information to the writing committee. And then the next was, when will there be a full board discussion and who will be part of that full board discussion? I honestly don't think we got to this question. We might have started talking about something else. So, but our thought was that there would be because there would be a process or a policy put in place, a lot of those questions would be contingent upon what the policy is that we rolled out. So those are our thoughts that we had. If my other committee members want to help me.
well, go ahead, Deborah.
Thanks, Jacqueline. That was an amazing summary of what we discussed. And I just, only because we spent so much time on this one word, I just want to clarify that since I was the one that talked with Harris Payne, I don't want to misrepresent it. These are my words that I used when I do know that he had a lot of diversity on his writing team for the social studies standards. But when we said diversity of thought, I believe what was meant was diversity of scholarly thought within that group. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I want to say thank you to my committee because we had, as you can tell, a long discussion and very thoughtful discussion where we went back and corrected each other and changed things about what we said. And I taught group discussion, and I think this was one of the best group discussions that I've been a part of. So I want to thank my committee for that. And Jacqueline, thank you for presenting it so well. And Maureen, I want to thank you for the opportunity and the time that you gave us to do this, because I think it helped our group become a more cooperative and collaborative group.
There you go, handing out the positives that you do so well. Thank you. Before I move on to Lisa and her committee's work, I'd just like to check with the board members in Lisa's committee. Do you have any clarifying questions of Jacqueline or her committee before we move on? I'm not looking for discussion, just anything with clarification. Robin?
Yeah, this went up into the area of, let's see, I'm not coming up with it. Oh, I believe the Teaching and Learning Committee. Can you turn your microphone on? Excuse me, sorry. In the role of the Teaching and Learning Committee, you mentioned AQuESTT committee. I just need to know what, because I think, isn't teaching and learning also considered AQuESTT? And then what, student success is also AQuESTT? I'm assuming what you're meaning is the involvement of the student and student success. Okay, yeah. That was...
And Robin, within AQuESTT, we have two domain committees.
Right.
The teaching and the learning and the student success and access.
Okay, but again,
Right.
I understand that, but I just want to make sure that you're thinking both of those should be involved. Okay, thank you. I don't see anything else. I just really appreciate under Patsy's leadership and the committee and Deborah and Jacqueline and their presentation. Thank you very much.
Patty?
Yes, Jacqueline, as you spoke, it just reminded me that for my own benefit, I need to go back and read descriptions of committee responsibilities, because I think that's going to be very important in this process. I think I also need to go back and really look at responsibilities. You know, what is the board's responsibility? What is the commissioner's responsibility? I think that's going to be, again, really important as the ad hoc committee starts working on this. Just that comment.
Lisa, then Patsy.
Thank you for the thorough report out from your committee. A couple of questions. One was a comment, the board would control getting information out to the media. How would that look?
So, are you?
Either Jacqueline or the chair. I just don't understand that.
It's more, let me try to clarify this. I see that less of a procedural question and more of a policy type question. So to give you a little bit more context, there were times in the health standards process where copies of the health standards were released to the media prior to the board seeing them. And so we envision that the board would at least have to vote and approve standards before, or see them before, and okay them before the commissioner is able to send a copy of them to the media.
Okay, that clarifies that, thank you. And then I couldn't write it down fast enough. I was trying to write down the keywords of everything that you said, but I thought I heard something about the board involvement in curriculum, and I might have. No. Okay, good, thank you.
I want to say that, to add on to Jacqueline's first question, is that we would approve the draft that was sent out. We'd vote on that and approve that. So I don't want that to get mistaken that it's a done deal when we're sending it out to the
okay.
press.
All right.
Because it can go 1, 2, 3, 4 times. We know that. And so it would just be saying that we are ready as a board for it to go to the media.
Okay, that further clarifies, thank you.
I think I would just like to give a bit of clarification when Jacqueline talked about the information being released to the media. There is a period of time where it goes out to the media as what is called embargoed, and they are not to release any information, but they have it ahead of the public. But they are not allowed to talk about it outside to any groups or people. It is to stay within their purview of a journalist. So I just want to hope that clarifies a little bit of the information being embargoed. Robin.
Just to follow up on that, okay, when it is embargoed, for not only this group, but maybe for anybody who might be listening to us or whatever, who does receive an embargoed copy?
I'm going to ask David Jesperson to step up to the microphone and address that, if that's okay. Oh, thank you. Commissioner, would you address that first? There you are.
Yeah.
Suit and tie even.
Yeah, I'm all dressed up and no place to go. No, I think that, first of all, good conversation. I appreciate all the conversation so far, so I'm taking all that in. The embargo itself, like there's been different approaches to it. And actually, as you have that conversation, I think the consistency around that approach to embargoed or public release is one of the things that I think can be done. So like sometimes like on data that might go to the schools, there's an embargoed release. And that's really almost kind of the, perhaps David can speak to it, but kind of the agreement between press and those sometimes public officials. There's been different times where it's school officials, the board, and others that would would have that in place and shouldn't release it. Public records are another interesting part of this, right? Once we release something to the board, it actually becomes a public record. And I just would note that, not that I have an answer for that, but I understand what you would like to accomplish, and we'll have to talk through how that can best be done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Deborah?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, provide a little further information on some of that, thinking about the public relations strategies. You know, that it's more than just the release of the document, but in the era that we live in today, information is so important out there. And the way we did it is the content was out there before any other information was out there. And so a lot of people weren't able to listen to the process and understand you know, that there would be multiple drafts, that it was never going to be required of any school district or any parent at any time. Those conversations didn't happen the way they needed to. And so I think some of our discussion was about a larger scale information strategy plan, you know, so there is information getting out before the actual draft itself of any standards, so that, and there is an opportunity, you know, for a lot of information to go back and forth, so that it isn't, just a lot of focus on the negative things. There's instead we have a responsibility, I believe, to educate, be transparent, et cetera, and that's just part of the strategy before we even release standards. Thank you.
Jacqueline?
Maureen, I would just ask if we could hear the thoughts of the other committee members before we start going into why and how, or the reasons for which we thought the way we did.
Good idea. Thank you. Lisa, I think you're up.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to the committee members on my committee. What you're going to hear in a few minutes is exactly what we all decided, a consensus that should be written down and considered. And so I'm very proud of the committee and the work and the conversation. We even had a working lunch. That's how into it we were, and stayed in the room. So a lot of thought went into these things. And I think we also need to remember that we've covered 9 content standards with the same process, and it worked well in the past, but now we're trying to figure out where the challenges are. So with that, I'll begin. We would like to receive the draft of the standard a week or two before we actually, so we can have an actual discussion. It worked out where we didn't get into the details during the committee, and that caused some challenges along the way. And we had a sense that it went to the public too soon, and I think your committee also, we need to really think about, the public needs to know and understand, but it shouldn't be rushed like I and my fellow committee members thought it was too soon. We need more rationale for the content. The whole board needs to review the standard earlier than they had access to it. Board members, including our committee members, we feel that board members need to remember their role as a member of the State Board of Education in this process, so that none of us interfere with the process in any way. And that was adamant from all 3 members. Policy. When as a board member, we were taught this at the beginning when we first came on the board, that we don't use up staff time. So if someone calls a staff member and asks for 4 hours of staff time, it's taught to us not to do that, but if someone does, there should be consequences if this happens. And the board will need to be given notice. Bylaw 3, we thought we could revise that to include consequences when not following policy guidance. Writing groups, we were thinking K3 in the standards process, just break it up in groups however the staff decides, but they need to, like for the health standards, if the K3 and then 4-6, middle school and high school, need to communicate with each other before it ever, comes to us. And what is the advisory role? I think we're lacking in guidance on this, and some of the a few of the advisory committee members, at least I got one email saying if she or he had a chance to review it, it wasn't what they thought would be in there, so we need to work on that. Also, parent perspectives need to be included, perhaps in the advisory group. And the writing team needs diversity of gender representation across the state and divided into grade clusters for this type of work where the communication. I think communication, and the group agrees in different parts of this process are vital if we want it to succeed. And fellow board members, Robin, Patty, Maureen. Did I do that bad a job?
Oh, that was good. That was good. Patty or Robin, any other additional thoughts?
Because I know they wanted to say something earlier, I don't know.
Patty?
I don't know what I wanted to say earlier, but what I'm thinking right now is that I appreciate the discussion that occurred in the committees, because I think as a member of the ad hoc committee, this gives us lots of food for thought. I think we have work ahead of us, but it will be good work, and I think it will be really important that we are asking questions of staff and getting their input through this process as well.
Robin?
Thank you again. And thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. At the risk of being too specific, I do believe there are some things that I really feel important that this group need not address, but it needs to be addressed at some time. And some of them were already covered, and so I won't go into any of those things. Just from a standpoint of philosophical thought and the broad range of philosophical thought, from very progressive to very conservative. And when we choose writing committees, advisory committees, we believe that that needs to be given a lot of thought. Again, I could go into more detail on some of that, and maybe we will later in our conversation. I have the question about what was our hurry? And of course, timing has been a big issue here. In 2020 hindsight, we're always, we all know that we can be a lot better when we can look back. And of course, that's the purpose of this here. But 2020 hindsight would tell us that this was not a good time for health standards to be brought forth. It was a time in which we'd been, 1 year then into the pandemic, and we're still fighting the pandemic. We have made some adjustments in other timelines, maybe because of the issue we had with health standards, but it would have been, 2020 hindsight, a wise move for, and I'm reminded of this too, when I point fingers, there are also 3 of them pointing right back at yours truly. So when I seem to be pointing fingers, I understand that I'm part of the problem. But this was a chaotic time. And there was really no strong reason to continue. I understand that we were getting to a point where we were going to go back to our core standards, and they needed to be revised. But here is the health standards, and I understand we wanted to get those done and out there before we got to the revisions. But we should have been much more understanding of the situation that we were in. The middle of a pandemic, very chaotic. Why did we think that this would be a great time or the right time to bring forth health standards? There was, early in the process, I was unaware of some of the things that were going on behind the scenes. Whether that was through emails, which have now become very public, and have, of course, been a main source of much discussion. But even beyond that, when people knew that this was happening, that there were emails that were going out there, I can remember specifically asking the question about, okay, are there activists involved in this? And people will say, well, what is an activist? An advisory person, or whatever the case might be. And I was assured by people who I think knew that there were some real strong movement by certain groups in writing of these standards. But I was told, and I have to believe that they believed that it was true, that no, there are no activists involved here. Well, I write an article to my group, my people in my area, the 7th District, and I send that out to all of the newspapers, both weekly and daily. And in that I put, there is no activist involved with this process. Well, however you want to define that, in my definition, and probably in the definition of many of my constituents, there indeed were activists. And I felt a little bit left out there. And that was difficult for me to respond to at that particular time. So that's another area that I was just concerned about with this. Things that could have helped in the trust factor if I would have known. I'm just going to mention one more, and I've touched on it already, but I think it's really crucial, and that is the department did a great job with 9 standards. And so therefore the complacency or maybe the comfort level became too great. And again, I'm pointing fingers back at me. I should have taken the time, regardless of how little time we had. I should have found the time. I should have taken the time to read those. But did we become too complacent? Did we become too comfortable? And if indeed those things were the case, well then that's on us. And so I just... those are some areas that I want to make sure that I reemphasize. And I appreciate the chair giving me this opportunity.
Deborah?
One of my favorite things about you, Robin, is you're willing to have any conversation, and you're a good listener, and you process, and I've enjoyed my conversations with you immensely. And one of the things we've talked about is my constituent group is very different than your constituent group. And, you know, I have found that wherever I go, whether it's yoga class or a party or whatever, I have people coming up to me now thanking me. They think I'm a hero, and for being an advocate for science, in support of our LGBTQ community, and in support of children that are in homes where they're being mistreated. And I appreciated that they understood that that was where my advocacy was. I want to just clarify, though, I've never heard that there was, and I've never felt anyone was advocating for a philosophical thought. I would say, when speaking for myself, it has always been for a scholarly point of view. When 90-some% of the pediatricians across the country and across the state of Nebraska, and when the National Pediatric Association and the state pediatric physicians associations all say that these are medically accurate facts and that it helps youth at a certain age to be successful because of the day and age we're living in, those aren't philosophical thoughts, those are scholarly facts. And for me, it's never been about philosophical, it's never been left or right, liberal or whatever. It's been what's going to help our students be more successful, which is the reason I was advocating in our small group that the equity committee, the student success committee, should be the lead on this effort instead of the teaching and learning. Because I think that when we're talking about standards, we should be looking forward at the world that our youth are going to be living in, not what we've been teaching in the past and the way we've been doing it. And I'm not saying that's what I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but just in general, this is about students and making them successful in the future. And that's why I felt like it really did deserve a strong voice around student success and equity. But lastly, the word activist is a little offensive to me because one of the people that was, first of all, I think we need some clarity around how the advisory committee was used in this, because my understanding was that the advisory committee was not used at all. So these quote activists, in my understanding, is that maybe once they were given input and that was it. And not all of them even gave input. So that was why I was calling Harris Payne and a lot of other people to understand the role of the advisory committee. But the word activists, when you're referring to somebody, in particular, one of the people that's taken a lot of heat, and I feel so bad about this, but Lisa Schultz, who works for the Women's Fund, but she's the one of two people in the state of Nebraska that has a certification in sexuality education. Like, she is one of the most informed scholarly people about best practices and research on sexuality education. And that's not an activist. That is a scholar. And I think to use the word activist is inappropriate. When the commissioner said there were no activists involved, he was accurate. There were no activists involved. And so I want to put in perspective, that these are scholars, and to call them something else is disrespecting all the education that they have and disrespecting what the best practices are today, what the research says, and what the majority of pediatric physicians say is fact and science. So, thank you.
Lisa?
I appreciated what you clarifying that. When you talk about moving standards to teaching access committee, I believe it is within the teaching and learning purview to work with the standards. It's what the students need to know and learn and be able to do. And that is listed in our duties. Therefore, I believe it needs to stay in the teaching and learning. And where I believe it goes to the access committee is making sure that those standards are accessible to every single district in the state, and work on that end of it, giving students access to what they need to know, do. So that's just how I believe, and I believe that's one of our duties under the Teaching and Learning Committee is to work with staff, commissioner, and help with developing the standards, and the whole board now working on the process, I think will make it so much better going in the future. But I think we, as Patty said, we need to go back and read what the duties of the committees are and follow that. And if you want to change, follow a process where we relook at the duties. I'd be okay with that. But we need to do what we're tasked to do as it was presented to our committees. And if we want change, then we need to go through a process to change. And I'm fine with that too.
And may I ask oh, go ahead.
Jacqueline?
So for fear of not wanting to sound like I'm rambling, I want to give people just a little bit more context about my thoughts on where I'm coming from. I've heard, and one of the things I think every time I hear it said, it kind of just like jolts me, is the previous process that we had worked. And I keep coming back to there was no process. Maybe the procedures or the things that we did worked, but I got back to an email that I sent, and these emails, but mine are a little different. May 12th, I emailed Ryan and the commissioner, and I said, I realize today that I do not have a great handle on the standards review process. Do we have a document that outlines the process that we follow? I put together some pieces of the process, but would like for someone to guide me to a more formal document or outline of the process. As of now, here's what I understand. There is no document. There isn't anything. And so it's hard for me to believe or to say what we had worked when there wasn't anything. And I got referred back to a document that says, here was my response. Our content area standards reference guide will provide some information for how standards are developed or revised, and I got a link to that document. But there are no quote unquote hard and fast rules around each process, because I believe it's important for each process to reflect the uniqueness of each content area, which means each process is different. Even so, we've tried to create some consistency for each content. Even so, we have tried to create some consistency for each content area. I'll answer your additional questions through the context in the original message, and I'll include a mix of health education context and standards in general. If there's any other questions, let me know. But I want us to, my hope is that as we talk about this, we have so many policies and procedures, and it's just shocking to me that something so important, we haven't given it the consideration that we need. Another thing that comes up to me consistently is, what is the board's role? What's our role in this? Well, I pulled up that content area standards reference guide, and I went down to page 5. And it says figure 1, content area standards and curriculum in Nebraska. And it says standards. And right over to the right, it says determined by the Nebraska State Board of Education. That's our document that I was told to reference. And under it, it said indicators. Over to the right, determined by the Nebraska State Board of Education. Not the commissioner, not the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, us. So it is very hard for me to say we should take a back seat or question how much we need to be involved in this process when this document says it's our standards. And if that document's not enough, it referenced me to the statute, Nebraska Revised Statute 79/760.01. And I'd ask all of our board members to consider this. The very first sentence, the State Board of Education, us, shall adopt measurable academic content standards for at least the grade levels required for the statewide assessment. Statewide, the standards shall cover, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 4, the State Board of Education, us, not the commissioner, not staff, the State Board of Education shall develop a plan to review and update standards for each subject area every 7 years. So this committee, the ad hoc committee, the development of the process, all of that is in our purview. Those are all things we need to be doing, that we should be doing, and I would hope that all of you would join me in supporting that and kind of step outside of this idea that we don't want to step on toes when it's already in the documents that we've been provided, and kind of get out of the mindset of, well, what we did in the past worked, the process worked. Well, we know for a fact there was no written process, so let's just kind of be forward thinking and start working on developing one.
Before I call on other board members, Jacqueline, you're referencing what page on what document? Is it this one, Content Area Standards Reference Guide? What page are you referring to?
5.
This page,
Each of you have a copy of that, yes.
is it this?
And where does it read that information?
Figure 1.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Deborah first, then Lisa, and Robin, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Okay, in that order.
So I appreciate that summary, Jacqueline, because that has been the understanding from the beginning, is there has not been a process. And we knew within 3 days of the first draft being released that the process had already failed. Like, we couldn't come back from that, which is why there were suggestions to, since there wasn't a specific process, and we knew we needed to do something, and I have said before that I really admired how nimble that the Board of Regents was in understanding the controversy that they were faced with in regard to the CRT resolution, and I felt like we owed the people and students of Nebraska to look at our process. And what I learned from Dr. Harris Payne is that there are best practices for this process. And I never heard one person on this board or from any part of this board talk about what the best practices are, even though we didn't have anything written down. But we definitely weren't following those. And I guess the other point that I want to make is in regard to board participation in the process, I, for the last 2 years, have been asking for a policy about how we select and put together committees. And I'll say this again, I keep seeing the same names, the same people from the same racial groups, from the same backgrounds being used repeatedly in committees. And there has been a very significant lack of diversity. And so the only input that I had into this process, because I was boxed out, was to try to add some diversity of scholarly thought that I knew would be missing, and some diversity of representation from our demographic groups across the state. And I was not successful, but it was something that I believe is a very important part of the process, that while I have been advocating for this in our Student Success Committee for the last 2 years, I will continue to advocate for the role that as we approve committees, as we look at them, we need some kind of, chart for making sure that we aren't using the same people and that we do have a representation from all of the different groups across Nebraska. Thank you.
Lisa?
When you say committee group diversity, are you talking about?
Writing and advisory.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Jacqueline, I appreciated what you said about what the challenges were, but that's why we're here today. we were, I think all of us surprised with how this turned out. And that's why we're here. We recognize that it's a huge problem, and we're here to make suggestions for solutions. And then as far as when I first got on the board, I can't remember what standard we were working on, but expert staff came in, and I can't remember if they gave a PowerPoint or handed us a document at the time, but they explained what the process would look like, and as we went through the review process, they updated us and said what would come next. So yes, it probably needs to be written down. I don't know that it needs to be in policy or guidelines, but I think it would be helpful for the future to have some kind of guidance in writing. But our guidance was from staff explaining the process and guiding us through the process that they worked. I think sometimes even with other organizations, maybe a lot of that's written down, but there are some organizations, it's just, like what they did for us. Experts come in and explain what needs to be done. Here's what we're going to do. And then the workers go out and do it. So now we know there needs to be change. That's why we're here today. So let's find some solutions, some things that work better for all of us moving forward. So,
Robin, you are next, and then Patty.
Yeah, I was, first of all, I was going to try to say what you said very well, that's why we're here, to come up with a written process. I do take a little, or I am concerned that there maybe is this belief out there that it was just dumb luck that we had 9 good standards. Oh, just happened. And that's misleading. Maybe it was a process that was not written, but I've got documents right here in front of me of at least half of those, not quite half of those areas of those content areas. I don't think it was just, we lucked out on this one and we had a good job. We came up with a good standard. I guess maybe what I'm saying is thank you to those people who were involved with that, because again, not only have we had 9 good standards, we also had a revision on our English language arts. We're in the process of revising our mathematics. We will soon be doing, what's the next one?
Math.
Okay, I said math, but the next one after that. So apparently there is something more out there than just saying we had no process. Maybe the process was not as formal as it should be, and I agree 100% with what Lisa said. It needs to become much more formal. But it wasn't dumb luck that we happened to just hit a good spot and had 9 good standards and 2 or 3 strong revisions.
Deborah?
So I guess just because I've spent so much time interviewing people about previous standards processes, I will say that the social studies standards, not the ones we approved 2 years ago, but the prior ones, I'll just simply say that process was hijacked, and there was a lot of negativity that came from that process because the idea of American exceptionalism was entered into the standards at the last minute, and it was working contrary to what the standards were trying to do. And so I can't say that the process has worked every time from the limited understanding I have from the interviews I've had, but I will say that what I heard today was, and I've observed the science standards being proved in social studies, and Patsy Kojohns was able to share with us the fine arts. And what we learned is there were different public relation, I hate to use that word, but information efforts in those standards that helped educate the public. There was different uses of the advisory committee in those standards. And I do think that our committee did try to put some of those recommendations into our list of ideas, but I guess I just think that it hasn't been dumb luck, that there really has been some missteps, and we have missed out because we haven't looked at, had a consistent process, a consistent, transparent process that was based on best practices. So, thanks.
Patty?
Thank you. I would echo Robin and Lisa, your comments. That was one of the comments I was going to make. That processes may not be written, but certainly there were processes, and at times they worked very well. I guess I would also go back, Jacqueline, to your reading of the state statute that says that the state board adopts. Adopts to me is different than saying that the state board develops. That's a very different process. I think when you look at page 5, what that's trying to show there is the level of influence or the level of responsibility, where it says determined by the state board, and if you look at the bottom level, it's determined by local school districts and classroom teachers. So the word determined there to me does not, again, mean that the state board is responsible for the development of things. The state board's responsibility is adoption.
Lisa, then Jacqueline.
In comparing, we have mandated, whoops, I bet I'm not on. Oh, I am. We have mandated standards and we have unmandated standards. And the fine arts are wonderful standards, but they're not mandated. And therefore, especially with the fine arts, is open to different kinds of things that they might want to do in their standards compared to a content area standard like math and social studies and science and so forth. So I think we need to be very careful in comparing fine arts and math. The processes might be the same, but not everything. When you're mandating something, and the process we've used in the past, and the more I thought about that, I remember Harris Payne coming in very often to our committee, and PowerPoints and handouts, and so we had a lot of best practice information when we worked on those social studies standards. He met with us as different things were progressing. And so he did an outstanding job with that. And that was social studies. And we had a wonderful outcome with ESL. So I just want to keep moving us forward and being careful what we're comparing and find solutions. I can't wait for the ad hoc committee to get to work and look at what we've written and pick up on what really needs to be changed and figure out that process, get it written down so we don't have to address this for a long time.
Jacqueline?
So I wrote down the word expert staff because I think someone mentioned, I think it was Lisa, you said there was a time when at a previous iteration of standards, we had staff come in, experts talk to us, and walked us through what the process was going to be. And if you guys heard some of our recommendations from our committee, it was to incorporate exactly some of those processes, which would be for us to be able to hear from expert staff. So I think a lot of places we are definitely on the same page. I think, I heard a lot of themes today about making sure that advisory committees are diverse, making sure everyone, we thought that there was definitely a timing issue. I think Robin's sentiments were, we don't understand why this was so rushed. And so I think overall there were a lot of very, very similar themes, and I tried to write down some of those. And I think maybe the benefit of having me coming from one group and two other members coming from a different group is that we will be able to kind of put together some of those thoughts that were coming from everyone. One thing I do want to just point out, though, is I do have the benefit of being new on the board, right? And so you get to see a different perspective. But I don't ever want it to seem as though we are, or I am, criticizing what has been done in the past, because I think sometimes it loses sight that other board members feel like they have to defend, you know, well, we did it this way because we did it this way because it's not the Wild Wild West out there. And it's not that I personally believe it was the Wild Wild West out there. I think we talked about and started with what are the wins that we've had with health standards in the past, and people talked about them. But what I do believe, and this is just, again, my opinion, is when you don't have something written and things work, you start to trust in the process and you stop questioning it. You stop asking questions and you just believe that things are going to work. Like we believe when we go to sleep and wake up the next day, our house is going to be there. Or we believe that food is in the refrigerator where we left it. We just start to develop this continuous trust. And then when things break down, that's when we have to troubleshoot it. And I think we're at the process where we've got to troubleshoot what broke down. Right. And so I don't ever want it to look like I'm criticizing individuals, but rather we know we can't deny that there is a problem. Let's just figure out what the themes are, figure out what we want to change, and get it changed. So those are my sentiments.
Patty?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I get the sense that we all believe that we need to formalize process. We need to think of questions about the process and seek answers or help formulate answers to those. For example, what is the role of an advisory committee, right? Who are subject matter experts? I think having definitions will help us in formalization of the process. So actually, through this conversation, I'm excited that we're going to have an opportunity to really work on this and come out with a process that should be beneficial. I think we have to allow for flexibility within the process, but I'm excited about what we can accomplish.
Me too.
Robin, then Patsy.
Yeah, again, Patty, well stated, and I certainly agree 100%. And I do look forward to working with Patty, and I truly look forward to the leadership that I know Jacqueline will bring to this group. So I appreciate the conversation here today, and I really look forward to the conversations that we're going to have. I'm sure that they will be very interesting, and all of you want to be little flies on the wall so you can hear what we're going to be talking about. No, I seriously, I do look forward to working with Patty and Jacqueline on this, and look forward to Jacqueline's leadership. Bye.
Who did I call on next? Oh, Patsy.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to something that you said, Lisa. Not disagreeing with you, but disagreeing with you. And that is that just because a subject area is not mandated does not mean that it should not be approached with the same vigor, the same requirements that the mandated standards have. Because if you look in national law, I think President Obama said that fine arts was a core part of the curriculum. And so just because Nebraska hasn't caught up with that yet and made the fine arts mandated for every student, doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at it with the same lens that we do every other core subject. And I don't mean that to be anything to you. I just mean it to be something that I know needs to change.
Lisa, then Deborah.
I guess I agree with what you said, and we've talked about that before, and the fine arts lead to better academic progress in any area. I guess I'm looking at unmandated as far as the steps that you might take for math, as far as the states, not the quality, not addressing the same issues that are important to the fine arts, but sometimes like how you get to the point with fine arts might not be the same as you would with math, but fine arts are definitely very important. And so,
I think the steps might be different for every subject area.
Yes.
Not just,
well, we were talking about comparing fine arts to the content standards, and I was just saying, yeah.
Deborah?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate what I've heard today, and am so glad we had this opportunity. Thank you for whoever had the vision for this. I think it was a very positive experience. Anyway, I think it's what I've learned from these kind of experiences is that this is going to make us much stronger as a team. I believe, because I think we've learned a lot more about, just how this work has been done in the past and ways that we want to work and do this work in the future, and different things that we can think about. And I appreciate the work that the Teaching and Learning Committee did, because I know you put in a lot of extra hours. These, last however many months feels like 10 years, but I'm sure you'd agree. But appreciate your work and this discussion today, and I'm really excited about, just moving forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I just want to wrap this up because we have 3 minutes left. One thing, Jacqueline, you brought up an outside evaluation team to perhaps look over what you work on. And I hope you'll give that some consideration to bring forth to the board later on. I think that's a great idea. And I know that Dr. Epler forwarded to me a couple of consulting groups or agencies or organizations that do that type of work, so we can check those out if you need to. The other thing that I hope that all of you as board members will respect the work that the ad hoc team will be doing in the next couple of months, and let them do their work. Checking along the way to see how things are going, what's going on, whatever, that needs to remain inside the ad hoc committee. And so Jacqueline, I hope that you will keep that, what goes on in your committee stays in your committee until you decide you have something to bring forward. That would be my goal for the committee. I feel very strongly you'll be a great team with a great leader, and you have your work cut out for you. And I just want to leave you with collaboration was very important for me for today. And I go back to the quote I've used before with you from Helen Keller that Patsy gave to me one day. Alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And so let's keep that in mind from what we did today. I hope that we can have future meetings like this. It is my great hope to do so, perhaps even again in December on different topics. So good luck, ad hoc committee. Good luck, Jacqueline, and I know you'll do a great job. Lisa, we're going to end this because it's 2:30.
I just have a question.
Yes.
I need to type up what I had
Oh, you
written.
can I'm sure you can send that to her. You don't need to hand that to her today.
Okay. I just wanted to make,
But I would certainly get that to her by the end of the weekend so it's fresh in your mind.
that's what I wanted, a deadline. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
I'm sure, Jacqueline, you're okay with that. Oh, yeah. You don't have anything else to do? No. Okay. With that, we are at agenda item 3, adjournment. It is 1:29. The State Board of Education will reconvene at 3:00 p.m. in this room for a business meeting. Welcome to the November 4th, 2021 State Board of Education meeting. The Commissioner is joining us remotely today out of an abundance of caution. He had a close contact with a known positive case of COVID and is following our COVID protocol. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. Please note that board members may be using their cell phones and laptop computers to access the agenda and information related to this meeting. Live web streaming is available through the State Board of Education. Number 4, 2021 State Board of Meeting will now come to order. It is 2:04 p.m., or 3:04 p.m., I'm sorry. Andrea, please call the roll.
Patsy Kojons.
Here.
Lisa Fricky.
Here.
Patty Goobles.
Here.
Jacqueline Morrison.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Deborah Neary.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Here.
7 present, 1 vacant.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Agenda item 1.3. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main entrance doors. The Open Meetings Act is also posted on the State Board website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Agenda item 1.4, COVID meeting protocol. Ryan?
I don't know how to use these microphones. Oh, Drew turned it on for me. Thanks. A reminder that we continue to have COVID meeting protocols. Those are at the back door for our folks joining us from the public, and ask you generally joining us to be aware and sensitive to others' needs and approaches to COVID-19 masks, social distancing, use of hand sanitizer, those types of things.
Thank you, Ryan. Agenda item 2.1, agenda overview and consent agenda process. Commissioner Bloomstead?
Yes, and again, I'm the champion of COVID protocols today, but sorry I can't be with you personally, but I appreciate the opportunity to join in this fashion today. I do not have any items that were requested to be removed, and I'm just looking for confirmation of that. I think, Maureen, I'll take your head shake as confirmation of that. And I'll go on to reporter rules, if that's all right.
Yes, I'll let you continue your reports of 2.2, 2.1A through 2.4.
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. So the first thing on report on rules, and you have it in your Spark, that we're still awaiting Rule 24 regulations for certificate endorsements for review with the Attorney General's office. But this month, I think just last week, Rules 1 and Rules 2 governing kind of, well, I guess audit and uniforms, uniform accounting for public schools were both approved. Rules 1 and Rule 2 were approved by the governor last week. So I'll pause it in case there was a question. Otherwise, I'll move on. So,
Any questions? There are none.
all right, very well. And I don't know if Ryan has actually an update on report. If he doesn't, I want to take just a little moment to thank all of the staff that make these things quite possible. It's actually quite remarkable to sit from afar and participate in this fashion, and the staff that have done all of that work for all of these months, and very much appreciate all of you for that. The other thing I'd like, if she's in the room anyway, Kristen Yates is a new employee at the Department of Ed as our Information Systems Officer. For those who recall, Dean Folkers retired and took up another position earlier this year, and we were blessed and lucky to have Kristen Yates be joining us as one of our team members. So thank you, Kristen. And I can see you from afar. So also great technical work there. So thank you all, and thank Kristen for her joining the team.
And Commissioner, I just want to say I kept wondering who that individual was in the back of the room, so I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And welcome, Kristen. We'll put you to work.
I think she's feeling that already. So we are quite lucky and have obviously a lot of work ahead of us yet. So I do want to dive into a bit of a presentation with you today on really COVID impacts and things I'm hearing from the field. Obviously, we're in a unique moment in time, and again, just the reality of where we're at in the midst of this pandemic is pretty striking. And again, I guess I'm finding myself in this personal lesson of this particular week. But again, that we're seeing spread of COVID, right? Even among the vaccinated, we're seeing, kind of increased hospitalization, ongoing concerns, and that has a huge impact on our schools and a huge impact on the systems that serve our communities. And so I just want to start by acknowledging that. I am going to open up some slides. I think all the slides are actually in Spark, and so if display as they're set up in the room, you'd be able to look at them in, I think, a PDF form there. I've also included just attachments for kind of more for reference. The previous one of the previous attachments from last month is the testimony I provided for the Appropriations Committee back in the beginning of October. And I include that because I know we got into a bit of a dialogue around, we know kind of how that's working. I've included an update on investments that are being made underneath that ARP plan and underneath the ESSER's overall activities. And so I'll go through that as part of my slides. And then I also wanted to share just about the LEA, the Local Education Agency allocation process, so to our school districts and how that works. And so you can actually see that attached in the materials as well. So I'm going to try to share slides and see how wonderful my technology skills happen to be from this side. But I'll start that and see how that goes. I hope you can see the slides there, and you can give me a thumbs up if so. I don't see the thumbs up yet, so I'll pause for just a moment.
There is nothing.
Madam Chair, is anybody else having trouble accessing on their computer?
I don't know. Can you try to share the screen again, Commissioner? This is like the classroom when you're being evaluated.
How about now? I'm going to claim complete operator error too here in a second. So
Nothing yet.
okay.
There we go.
All right. Well, as I started to mention, we obviously know of many of the challenges that are facing our schools, but I've tried to be quite intentional here over the last 6 weeks or so of really diving in and listening to what schools are saying about the impacts that they're facing. Also trying to look at the data that we have available to us, and I'll share a little bit of kind of preliminary perspective on COVID impacts that we see across the state. And then really, again, trying to frame this as what are our opportunities? What are opportunities to move forward as a state? And hopefully be among the best places that we can recover from the impacts of COVID. And to the extent that we're able to be among the best places, it's because of the hard work of our schools across the state, our teachers, our custodians, our bus drivers, our principals, our administrators all over have given a really serious look at how we're able to keep schools open and do that as safely as possible. And so we should be very, very proud of that. I've shared a few times we're very much having to live in the present while also trying to keep an eye to the future. And that's been a difficult thing in the midst of the pandemic. So I'll talk through this. I'll talk through what I'm hearing from administrators, and I'll talk through kind of some of the key work that we've identified and the progress that we have towards that so far. Generally speaking, right, Nebraska schools return students sooner and more consistently than most other states did. I mean, I think that's very much been the case. And when I've had the opportunity to be involved in national conversations, certainly last school year in particular, it was a marked difference in how we were able to get back, and that's largely the will of our educators all across the state to make that happen. And even though we see impacts, our impacts, I hope, are less than they would have been had it not been for that very hard work. And again, we expect impacts, we see impacts, but I think that's really important. From a state assessment system as well, one of the unique things for Nebraska is we were very far down a path on an assessment vision that is and remains very interested in what's happening to students throughout a year versus just one time at an end of a year. And we were interrupted, like other states, on our end of the year assessments in 2020, but we were able to build a plan and be able to start a process of engaging our schools and our students in conducting assessment, and puts us in a unique spot to look at that. We're nearly 95% of our students statewide. I think it was 94.3, so actually a little short of the 95 mark. But and I anticipate that we'll try to do some detailed releases of data, not for our traditional data releases around accountability, but for us to better understand the impacts on our students across the state. And I'll dive into that a little bit as I go, and this is really just a preview of some of those things to come. So I have about 4 kind of preliminary observations I want to share with you. So this very first one is that Nebraska's assessment participation was very high, as I mentioned before, except it would have normally been nearly 99%, right? I mean, we have a very high percentage of students that are typically assessed in our schools, in our public schools. And this year was just a little bit over 94%. We want to be able to highlight also state assessment data can't be readily compared from this year to the prior years for a couple different reasons. But in particular, when you look back, it's a 2-year comparison. We have to be able to kind of address that. But we hope there's useful analytics, not just for our state purposes, but local purposes, and helps us put us on a path for our recovery all the better. Participation rate means in real numbers that 8,000 students actually weren't assessed. And that's a very substantial number where we can't afford, any one student even not being, appropriately educated and appropriately in a position to be able to move forward. And so that's a big impact. It's a big number overall. Our assessment system, obviously, like I was describing, is unique in that it pairs kind of interim assessments where in the long run, we're able to look at what's happening within a school year. And that's part of that assessment vision that's so important for us. And again, we've made some progress on that and continue to try to do that work. And then ultimately, this data provides us a bit of a baseline. And where we intend to be able to look at it from a COVID impact standpoint, it really comes in the next couple slides, but looking at how our student groups performed relative to how they performed, not just before, but how, what type of gaps we might see, other things there. And we do see kind of disparate performance within our preliminary data. and in participation as well, right? And so we should be very worried about highly mobile kids that were displaced in the middle of the pandemic, other types of challenges that we know we're hitting. We see disparate impacts across our student subgroups in race and ethnicity, English learner, special needs, income, et cetera. And so even though we might expect impacts across the board, we continue to actually see that the achievement gap is most likely growing in the meantime, and so that's really important part of our baseline and understanding where we're at. And though it's really not necessarily definitive, we have to continue to look at this data and think about other ways that we can actually inform ourselves about what those impacts were. And so again, just further work for us, but that's definitely what we're seeing in the overall. Actually, enrollment was one of those big things that we were concerned about as well. And if not just, some states, I think it was actually Michigan, I remember in the midst of the pandemic and having conversations nationally, and Michigan could not identify where nearly 150,000 students were, much less that they didn't end up in enrollment, right? Nebraska was in a very different circumstance based on how we're set up to be able to try to keep track of our students. And even though we were able to do that, we had shifts in where students might have attended school. We had a huge increase for a while of those that chose to be homeschooled. And that homeschool population actually was inflated quite a bit. And I don't know if I have the previous number, but it was just under 10,000 students prior to the pandemic, and then ballooned up to about 14,000, almost 15,000 students. And then what we've seen so far this year is that's kind of come back down to about a little over 10,000, higher than the pre-pandemic level of homeschool, but I think a really important part of the story that we have in our schools overall. And then one of our concerns is just that impact on our youngest learners, on all of our learners, but obviously those critical years of understanding and being able to become proficient as readers is a really important part of that. And so where we've been concerned before, we continue to see this, and we have both the benefit of the longest window of time to help our earliest learners recover, but also have to be very intentional that we're able to do that and do that well. And then my fourth observation around absenteeism. So similar to the enrollment changes, but those where we saw the impacts of this. And I'm comparing a pre-pandemic number to the middle or to the school year that we concluded last year in 2021. And you can see a pretty substantial impact. Obviously, one of our key indicators had been within our accountability system was around chronic absenteeism. We had done research in the past that knowing that students that just missed 4 days of school in a school year had a substantial impact on their academic achievement. That was research that we did with folks from the university. And you can see that number increased substantially in that time frame. Now, I don't include the data around the 2019-2020 year just on this particular slide. We have it, but that's even a little more confounding and confusing because obviously we had a quarter of a school year where everyone had to be out of school physically, and so those numbers are a little even more difficult to understand, perhaps as far as an impact on chronic absenteeism. And of course, for our definition, chronic absenteeism is any or missing 10% or more of a given year or given quarter or whatever it may be. So I'll shift to what I really am hearing from schools, and again, this is it's been very good to be out and about and visiting school officials and having a little bit of a chance to have some kind of one-on-one time and not necessarily be in a school for a particular reason, but just to have them share what their experiences have been and where they're at. And I've had many other opportunities to be able to be with school administrators and folks across the state in different meetings and different settings. Our staff has done this as well. And I think it's really important that we actually are able to take a moment to listen to what schools are saying on different fronts. And so a few of the challenges we hear, and I hope this actually rings true for you as board members too, the types of things, the types of challenges we're facing. But, you know, again, just concerns about teacher shortages and maybe in the profession. I do have a teacher advisory group as well that I really appreciate, that teacher burnout, right? We faced a lot of that. Obviously last school year, I've had administrators tell me that their teachers feel like it's March, you know, that kind of March difficult time typically in a non-pandemic year. And so there's a lot of burnout and a lot of stress for our teachers, and that has a way of impacting what happens in our classrooms. There's workforce shortages in other areas, from our paraeducators to our, you know, other non-certificated staff that are in our schools. And I specifically can list bus drivers here and had a conversation about, you know, some things that maybe we can look at from a policy perspective on ensuring that bus drivers can become available for schools as well. A real concern around early childhood capacity and seeing that come forward, and a couple different fronts there. One is some kind of regulatory barriers, but another is just like the rest of the school settings, the staffing shortages and the demand just don't match up. We need a real focus on you know, kind of workplace experiences and partnerships, and I've seen some great examples of that in our communities across the state. But again, we're hearing that needs to be a real focal point for us. And then supporting students with disabilities, as well as any highly mobile systems involved youth, our English learners. And one of the groups that I think substantially impacted in the midst of the pandemic are English learners. We can actually see that within our data as well, at least our preliminary data. So, and schools are asking us to provide leadership and guidance and direction in kind of that regulatory relief where we can. We've obviously provided quite a bit of flexibilities in the midst of the pandemic, and continue to monitor that and try to address the challenges that schools face. And then we have several community factors, including access to childcare, affordable housing, mental health of students and families and staff, and that's pretty consistent. And then our agency considerations about how we go about our operational improvement, our communication, you know, real concerns about assessment and accountability and how we come through this, because we're missing data years, how we actually address those types of challenges, how we live up to that vision of assessment as well, are all agency considerations that we have. And then kind of last, before I dive into a little bit of the details of the overall kind of the federal funds expenditures and direction on that front, we're trying to listen also to our various community partners, and what I hear from them and have heard throughout the pandemic, but really this desire to help align with what schools need, with what our students need, programs that they have that want to be able to support and leverage after school capacities, for instance, and a bit of that's really important for us. Thinking about the disparate impacts on communities, we're going to have to work with those partners. Even what we envisioned underneath AQuESTT, that we have these positive partnerships and relationships for student success, they become all the more important in this point in time. And I think we certainly hear that from our schools and our communities. And this willingness really to kind of pull in the same direction and collaborate and be partners with us in this moment in time is really an opportunity, and one that we really should be able to help take advantage of and help schools take advantage of at that local level. And I'll just lastly say that a lot of conversation around workforce and the desire to become partners in those spaces. And again, some great examples of things happening all over the state, but our community partners want to be engaged in that as well. So we're really trying to respond with a mix of federal funds, what we've heard from the field before, what we heard from communities and stakeholders before, trying to address the challenges of staff shortages, trying to address everything else that's kind of surfaced as impacts. In that period of time, and I think we reported that's back at the October meeting, but these kind of 5 areas that surfaced in our early stakeholder engagement conversations are really important: comprehensive mental health services, engagement with family and community, professional learning, really thinking about a teacher pipeline, but part of that work that we'll discuss and I think is near and dear to all of you, thinking about accelerated learning. So in this particular case, really thinking about addressing what we refer to as unfinished learning, as when we're able to measure that, what are the system supports that can be put in place to help students actually close that kind of learning gap and as they experience it. And then our real thoughtfulness around data and infrastructure and other support systems as we can. And this plays not just to where the department's at, but also where schools are asking for those supports as well. So this, I'll go through this fairly quickly, but this is also in that document that I mentioned in Spark. And so you can look at it in some other little closer detail. These are the specific things that, as we started bringing the board contracts and for approval, these are the specific things that we've already engaged in and had the board approve if it meet that threshold, and really with a significant impact on mental health. And I think later as we go through, I don't mean later today, but later over the months, we're just getting this kind of ball rolling. We can actually dive into each one of these and see how they're beginning to help in schools. There'll be a lot of different stories that are going to be really important around each one of these. But you can see the social emotional learning supports, the mental health supports, our scaled kind of partnerships and work with a lot of different schools and a lot of different places around the state. So are also thinking about family and community engagement and working on kind of this notion around community schools. And I mentioned the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation specifically, as we've done a lot of that work in the before and after school spaces all over the state, right? Our 21st century programs that are really designed to help provide further learning engagement for students after school. I was just at Walt Hill last week. A really impressive effort and program that I got to see there that's actually pre-K-12 for engagement for students, and it's part of that particular network. Working with students in areas of the state just to ensure that there's transition supports for students that are systems involved, thinking about different strategies there, thinking about ultimately finding further engagements. And so you can kind of see this already. Rosie on there, by the way, is really a focus on family engagement in the early learning space. And I think we reviewed that maybe a couple different times in the last few months, but again, all important for that type of family engagement piece. And then ultimately, one of the professional learning and that pipeline is thinking about how we improve the pathways for teachers into the profession, thinking about how we recruit and retain teachers. I know there'll be actually more work in this arena, but the idea that tying these supports for teachers is really important as well. And you can see where we're at with those particular proposals. Accelerated learning, and I guess I jumped ahead a little bit, but part of that expanded learning collaborative with Children and Families Foundation is both, I guess, on the family engagement side, but also clearly on the accelerated learning side. And so we want to also make investments in our work and our partnership with YRTC, thinking through how we ensure that there's education and acceleration strategies that are in place at some scale. Not every school adopts each one of those very same strategies, but we have a lot of school districts that look to see some learning acceleration, some software, some opportunity to engage in those fronts and make sure that we're doing that. You can see the professional learning to strengthen school tribal partnerships. As we're playing all these different roles, it's helpful to be able to ensure that we're thinking broadly about the investments to be made to actually impact as many places as possible. And for revision is the last one on this particular list. What I mentioned about revision, that ties back to the community processes to think about the engagement with communities and schools around career and technical education. And so, again, I think there's quite a bit of that thoughtfulness in the overall mix. And then finally, there's several different things on the data infrastructure and systems list. Part of that's helping to ensure that we have kind of key responses for COVID, key data collections that have to be in place, key kind of administrative functions that have to be in place. But it also includes things like the Boys Town Safe to Help hotline, right? That actually was legislation that was pursued by Senator Matt Williams and others, and worked in partnership with us around some of that. And I think it's going to be really important to kind of build out that project that's with Boys Town, and ensuring that helpline actually is there to assist students that are in need and students and families that are in need. And again, just critical work overall in the midst of the pandemic. And so the one last thing I'll mention on here too, we have the Children's Hospital Med Center, the campaign for COVID kind of response. Obviously, just this week, there's the opportunity for vaccine for younger age kids, really working with the Children's Hospital, pediatricians, general practitioners across the state to ensure that information's out there about what those best practices are. And so we have many different engagements that are going on, lots of different partnerships in the midst of this. We have some efforts going on with the state chamber to think about how, not just with them. I presented, I think, a little over a week ago to the Omaha chamber by Zoom as well. A lot of interest in how these things come together to help address every level of need within the community. I'm really pleased to be working with the Commission on Indian Affairs and Judy Goshkabosh on that front. We're doing a very similar type of engagement with the Hispanic Latino Commission, and I guess I already mentioned Children's Hospital. So there's other things that are in the works, other partnerships to be part of that, but it's important that we have that kind of broad-based approach overall. And then ultimately, we need to make sure that we're finding ways to re-engage students and families if they have been disengaged. We have to work with schools, and I tell our staff quite often that it's one of those, we're trying to do all this good work, and we do that good work through other folks, our partners in our schools, our partners in the community. All of that comes together, and it's really important that we're able to continue to do that. And we need community stability as well. We know that when students are in less stable environments, it's hard for them to come to school ready to learn, and it's this balancing act that we're going to have to do in the midst of the pandemic yet. So these are just a few things that I think are important. And then for further dialogue as we go, we have to think about how we support our schools most effectively. Been asked a lot. Obviously, we have the challenges of teacher workforce, and when we've had challenges on certification system or anything else, anything that bogs down that process, we want to make sure that we can get better at that. We want to make sure we can be responsive to schools on the finance side of the equation when we're trying to approve grants and manage all of those things so they can move forward with the plans that they have. I really think there's a need for us to focus on the kind of leadership of the have-tos right now, right? And I've talked to a lot of school leaders about that. It's like, what things can we prioritize? What things can we actually kind of set aside for a bit? And so there's some have-tos in this moment. And again, that's got to be a key focus. And then I think for us to do, and as we go through this COVID impact study a little bit more, picking some key indicators, and, whether early literacy, early math, experiences in workplace for students overall, those key indicators, if we can see those things grow, those types of engagements grow, those will be things that I'll want to bring back to you and say, these are key indicators that I'm going to be watching as we come through this pandemic. So that's what I have. I'm a little long-winded. You haven't seen me all day, so I've shared more than maybe I even intended time-wise, but I'll stop my share and be glad to engage in dialogue.
Are there any board members with questions? Jacqueline?
Hi, Matt. How are you?
Good.
I have several questions, and I
those assessment results as they come in. The team's actually working on that research, and I actually hope by December, I don't want to pin down a date, and I haven't asked them specific for a date, but by December to have a really good look at that data.
So when you say the COVID impact study, that's an internal study, not an external study. It's just, I don't want to say just, it's the department looking at the results of assessments.
Right, exactly. Looking at what we had proposed when we went forward with the assessment data was to have a good understanding of what that baseline was. So, yes.
Are you referring to student assessments, or is there a large, broader scope of assessment that's going out?
No, that's student assessment based on our state assessment system. And there's other data that goes with that, right? What's happened on student movement and those things too. So I guess that would include those things in the mix too.
So it's not when we say COVID impact study, it's data that we already collect. It's not in addition to what we normally do.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay. So I saw the report that you gave us with the expenditures of the ESSER funds, and I almost like, at the bottom it said, as of November of 2021, approximately 10 million remains in statewide set-aside funds. So is it correct that out of $84 million, only 10 million of that is left?
Yeah, that's uncommitted. Some of those things are not committed by the board yet, right, on that other particular list.
So when I looked at a separate report, it may have been that you gave us, it might have been an ESSER report, but it seemed like we didn't have to commit the last of those funds until, or the second, I guess it's the ESSER 3 funds, until 2024. Is that, I can't remember the exact month, but I believe it was 2024.
Yeah, 3 years from, I think that's right. So.
And so out of the funds we have, okay, so let me just ask a different question. So if we get the COVID impact study, or if the schools start spending their money and we realize the needs are somewhere else or there are other concerns, we only have $10 million to adjust. Is that right?
So some of those other programmatic pieces give us some chance to adjust too, right? But a lot of them, so there's a requirement for like the 21st century, like 20% of those funds had to be set into that. And so the intention there was to look at expanding those capacities within 21st century before and after school programs. So if we had, kind of if we found some area or some impact area, there's some flexibility, I think, with those as well. As an example, just using one example.
Okay, I had another question about one of the things listed was $15 million for technology modernization, security and risk management, and systems infrastructure. That is
for schools as well on data reporting and otherwise. That's not yet committed. That's planned, right? And so that's an area in which I still believe needs to be some further planning on that front.
So when I've looked at kind of the requests that we've gotten, and I will tell you what my concern is, we see a report usually on our consent agenda that says we're asking for this for ESSER funds, and then we review that. So on a different document that we've been provided with, 10% of funding, or $54.5 million, is dedicated to a state set aside. So those are our documents. And then it breaks down how that amount needs to be spent. 38 million allocated for 3 specific activities and interventions. to respond to students' academic, social, emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. And so has the board been provided with how each of these requests is actually specifically addressing the specific interventions that are responding to the needs of these subgroups? Because I personally haven't seen that connection happening. Or I'm not saying it's not, but have we been provided with those documents?
I think as we did each one of those kind of approvals, we could probably do a better job of connecting all those dots, but part of that is very much with that intention. That's to meet the requirements that they had on the expectations of those federal funds, right? I mean, that was the expectation of those. And so we can always go back into those and say, here's what that's going to impact, so you have a better sense of that.
So if we were to spend, I think it was $15 million on technology improvements, I might have that number wrong because I moved through the document. Which of the, out of that 10%, which of these categories do you think that fits into? We have 7% for addressing the needs of underrepresented student subgroups, 5% must be used for the implementation of evidence-based interventions, 1% must be used for evidence-based summer programs, and then 1% for evidence-based after-school programs. Of the remaining 16 million set aside, there's a 0.5% administrative fee with the balance of 13 million for any eligible activities that respond to the pandemic. So like, where does that fit into this, in your opinion?
Well, right now, what the big concern I think was for kind of the data infrastructure piece was ensuring like chronic absenteeism, right? How you can actually help support by looking at the ensuring that we have the data systems that are in place to do that. Supports for kind of resources that we go to schools overall. So learning management systems and other things along those lines are kind of part of that mix. I will say, probably not in this particular list, but something else to be looking at. We're also trying to pair up against the kind of digital education resources that went underneath GEARS or the GEAR funds and the GEAR 1 funds, and in part making sure that those things were available. Now that might have shifted a little bit since we originally even laid out those particular plans.
So on the professional learning and teacher pipeline, my math is not as fast as it used to be, but I'm looking at approximately $2.2 million, maybe a little more, for professional learning and teacher pipeline. Is there any more funds that are left or out of the 84 that we're looking to put into teaching?
A lot of those around the accelerated learning side also are in teaching supports as well. But as far as like the teacher pipeline kind of approaches, a lot of it's gone to also to the support side for teachers, professional learning and otherwise.
And I don't see, the other thing we talked about there definitely being a need for early childcare. And so have we looked at potentially putting money into those support systems?
Yes, and actually that ties a bit into the other areas too, recruiting teachers and thinking of those systems that are important for, even our before and after school programs have a bit of that tie in that space as well. But a big part of the kind of early childhood space, I think, is going to be helping secure, kind of that connection between schools and the early childhood providers as well. And some of that comes to the data side as we look at that.
And my last question is just, is there a reason why we allocated and approved or moved so many funds in 2020, 2021? I know some of it was part of the first ESSER, But knowing that this pandemic is still ongoing, we may not get any additional funds. There may be lots of things that we learn over the next year or two. Is there a reason that the department committed so much money up front and didn't take the strategy of waiting to see what other needs we're going to encounter?
I think there's actually a real desire to try to get the partnerships set up and see if we're able to meet those particular needs. Some of them require staff to be hired, and so I think part of the concern is that if staff are going to be, and not just by us, but by our partners, that some of that needs to be done sooner instead of later. Otherwise, you run out of time to actually have the impacts on those particular strategies.
Any other questions for the commissioner? Patty?
Just a clarification, when do all of those funds need to be expended?
Yeah, so they all have to be expended, and maybe Lane's in the room or Bryce is in the room right there. On the third round of funds is 3 years from essentially this fall, right? And here comes Lane, I think so.
Hi. Yes, they have to be committed by September of 2024, and the reimbursement's done by December of 2024.
You said committed and reimbursed by the same month?
No, I said September of 2024 committed and December of 2024 for the expenditures. Like this, the funding has to be spent out and checks cashed by December. Perfect.
So Lane, I have a quick question, I think, on that same piece. So when you say committed, like we have all this money that we know is coming. Did we have to have our plans put in place? Like schools had to have their plans put in place by a certain time frame. Do we as a board or as a department have to do that same thing?
We actually do. So our plan, this was actually the first time that a plan was required by the U.S. Department of Ed. Ours was approved preliminarily on October 14th. And we will have to go back in and share with the U.S. Department of Ed the evidence-based interventions that we're implementing, as well as some of these other categories, like the 1% for summer school that is required, like the 1% that is required for after school. And that was what the commissioner was detailing with the partnership with Nebraska Children and Families Foundation.
So that explains why there's so much money that shows that we're already committed now.
That's right. Yep.
That's what I thought. Thank you. Any other questions? Lisa? Lane?
I just wanted to thank the department for doing reimbursement rather than giving out the money and then finding problems. I think not all states are doing that. And so they have 3 years to spend it. And if they haven't followed the federal guidelines, they're not going to be reimbursed. So I thank you, Commissioner, and the department for making that decision.
Anyone else? Okay.
So I think that concludes that portion. I'll get back to my other. I do think I think that's it for me. So I think I was going to cover. I had to double check. So
Okay.
Thanks, and I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Moving on to agenda item 3, we have one item for special presentations and discussions. And would Ryan Four please come forward and introduce our next agenda item?
Good afternoon. Many of you attended the Nebraska Educator Shortage Summit last week
Yes.
in Kearney. That was an activity that was hosted by the Nebraska Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, NACTE. And they are an important partner to us through our teacher and administrator preparation programs. And so that is the professional association, like for certification officers in the educator preparation programs, might even include faculty members, deans of those colleges. And so knowing that many of you attended, knowing that educator preparation, recruitment, certification, all of those topics related to that workforce and pipeline are important conversations for the state board through your legislative and regulatory priorities, through some of your personal interests that you've expressed. We invited representatives from NACTE to come and provide a summary of the summit. And so you may know Sarah Skretta from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Jenny Jansky from the University of Nebraska-Kearney, and they are here to provide that summary for you from the summit last week. And at the end of their presentation, President Nichols, if you'd like, there could be time for questions. And I'll step aside and I'm going to run their slides from the side while they're presenting.
Thank you, Ryan. Welcome, Jenny and Sarah. It's good to see you and good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, members, for inviting us to present and speak with you this afternoon. We know the Nebraska Educator Shortage Summit is the topic that we discussed that day is something that has been on the minds of all of us in this room, and so we're glad to be able to come back and report to you on that day. So I guess I can't see the slides, so oh, there it is. Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I just want to tell you that, Ryan, you did a great job of explaining who NACTE is. I appreciate that. So you will see on this slide a list of our sponsors and partner, and as well as our parent organization, AACTE, which is the national organization that we belong to. And so this is where the funding came from for the summit. So when AACTE, our parent organization, offered a grant, we definitely took the opportunity to propose to them that we would receive the funds to do two things primarily. One is to identify the barriers and obstacles that schools have filling unfilled positions. And number two is to set a course of action to come out of that summit with actionable steps on how we might fill those positions and overcome those barriers. So the next slide is who we are. So we used our entire organization, I have to say. All 16 institutions played a part in some way in helping make this day possible. Several of them were there that day, and I hope those of you who attended got to visit with some of our institution representatives, and they all played a big part in that day. We were fortunate. When Sarah and I first started writing this grant and sitting down and talking about it, we said, we hope 25 people show up. That would just be great. It'd be a great conversation. And we were so pleased that 100 schools and other educators from across the state showed up. I think one of the things we were most proud of is at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the map. The state was well represented. Urban, rural, big, small, and you'll see who else was there. We had administrators from private, public, ESUs. We had the school boards were there, institutions were there, and the NSEA and many others, and many of you included in that. So we were very pleased with the turnout, and thank you to those who attended. Sarah.
Tag team, and we don't want to be on the camera if we don't have to be. Just on the screen right now is just an overview of what happened that day. We wanted everyone there to start from the same page data-wise. So we had a national and a Nebraska data presentation. You can see that the inverted triangle goes down because it did get very specific. We used, as Jenny referenced, some of that data for brainstorming on what the barriers and challenges are, what existing strategies and partnerships exist. And then finally, and even though it's the smallest word on the slide, it's the most important, and we move toward action. And when we say action, we meant it. And that's what we are really proud of as NACD, is we didn't want to have just another conference where people came and had that same conversation about the problems and about some possible solutions and then walked away until they could have that conversation again. We need to actually move the needle forward, and NACD is committed to doing that. So as a result of the discussion, there were 4 general areas that bubbled to the top from that group, and around those we have established task forces. One around certification, one around elevating and marketing the profession, one around praxis, and one around teacher recruitment and retention. And those are in alphabetical order, not in priority order. I just want to make sure you know why they're listed the way they are. We made folks sign up before they left, and we are pleased that almost everyone did. And so the next step, which you can go ahead. The next step is we have expectations and deliverables for these task forces. NACD members will be initiating those task force meetings. They have responsibilities and will have to report back. And the idea is that we're not only gathering information to potentially put together some long-term strategies at higher ed, but also across P20. That's going to be the key to all of this. And that's another reason that we included agencies and community members through school boards, because it really is an all-in kind of initiative. At Administrator Days next July, it's our hope that we can pull everything together. But what we heard loud and clear on the evaluations, and everyone turned in an evaluation, so that's good too. And the results were favorable. We can't wait until the report comes out to do some of these things. So once we finish analyzing the data, and we do have day jobs, so we didn't quite get that done from last week, we will be coming back to what we think would be the appropriate folks, whether that's an NDE committee, whether that's a higher ed committee, whether that's a P12 group, to see if we can start moving the needle on some of forgive the term, that low-hanging fruit, that we can make some changes immediately. We also hope to be part of the conversation. NACD is committed to being partners in P20 education, and certainly we were glad to be able to put this on, but we certainly are not the only leaders, nor do we want to be the coordinators of the shortage effort. It's a team effort, and so we look forward to that. Does anyone have any questions?
Deborah?
I just want to say I really enjoyed the discussions that day, and thank you for pulling that together. And I know we've commented earlier, the fact that it was solution focused was very helpful. And I love the fact that when all the committee groups reported out, I mean, there really were, a lot of consistency about what needs to happen, and there was some needs a lot of action right away. So thank you for your leadership in that. Really appreciate it.
I just want to reiterate that while Jenny and I are standing here in front of you, we really are just representing the 16 institutions. This was a group effort by all of your educator preparation programs, and believe me, we are all dedicated not just to training really good teachers, but to assisting in other ways as well. So we are here as representatives of that group.
One of the things I really appreciated about the day was the fact that you made it action-oriented in the end, even though that's a small word on your triangle there. But you didn't have people sitting there listening to information. You had, there was a short keynote, and then you broke them into their tables, and they did the discussing. They were active all day. The day went by just like that. And I think my observation was everyone really appreciated that piece right there. They were active. They walked away with a lot and knew that there was something going to come out of it. So keep up the great work.
Thank you. We had the same observation. There were no bystanders that day, and that was
Yeah.
a goal. So we appreciate that feedback, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jenny. And Sarah. Appreciate it. Agenda item 4, the president's report, and that's me. And first off, just as a follow-up, I want to thank Deborah and Lisa, Patty, Patsy, plus myself for attending that summit. I think it was a good. Oh, Robin, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Yes, you were there too. But I appreciate the fact that we sat as observers. So because we don't know what we might have to vote on down the road, but I think that we gleaned so much from what is going on out there between rural and urban. It was really well done. And to Ryan and the staff that have put this on here at this location, again, I want to thank you. This is not easy going from one location to the other. It's a lot of work, and especially during volleyball state tournament time, to even find a place that might even have accommodations for the board to stay that needed room. So I really appreciate the work that you did. And I also want to say to the entire staff that is here, not only were you here for your committee meetings this morning that you would have had questions for, but to see you still here and committed to this work, I just want to say thank you, and I think the entire board feels the same way. With the vacancy of Pat Tim's seat on the board, we can expect most likely next month to see a new board member that will be appointed by the governor. Names to be submitted, I believe, were due by last Friday to the governor, and he'll be making a decision in the next couple of weeks, is my understanding. So I know all of you will welcome that individual and make them feel welcome, and I look forward to having a complete board. I want to, collaboration took place earlier today. Some really good collaboration, and in our 1 o'clock meeting and our committees this morning. But I want to give a shout out to Vice President Co-Johns, because she was a major part in helping me get to this point for today. And I think the time that she spent with me and in reviewing things and suggestions paid off. So Patsy, thank you. Appreciate it a lot. And for the public that didn't hear earlier when we had our 1 o'clock work session, I just want to share what that work session was about. And I'm just going to read to you what I read off earlier. The State Board discussed at the October board meeting the possibility of the President forming an ad hoc committee to address the process of the health standards when they are discussed in the future. As President, I reviewed the conversation thoroughly from last month's meeting to ensure including thoughts and considerations should an ad hoc committee be formed by myself. As President, I have officially named 3 board members to an ad hoc committee of the standards process. Chair Jacqueline Morrison, Robin Stevens, and Patty Goebbels. And I am currently seeking a report from them to the leadership in January, no later than January 25th, of what they come up with, so they are going to be a busy committee. The committee will report to the full board in February with possible action taken at the March meeting, presenting any recommendations for a standards process, policy, or procedural rules implementation. And all board members had an opportunity to have input into what they would like to see the ad hoc committee consider as they work in their committee. And that took place in committees this morning, and then we had our 1 to 2:30 discussion this afternoon that really was very productive, I believe. And so thanks to all of you. And that concludes my report. I hope I didn't leave anything out I should have said, so thank you. Agenda, does anybody have a question for me on anything? Okay. Agenda item 5, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Motion made by Patsy. Is there a second?
Second.
Patty. Motion made by Patsy and seconded by Patty. Per board policy, there is no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda. Andrea, please call the roll.
Fricky,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Kojons,
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6, standing committee reports. Agenda item 6.1. As acting chair of the policy committee, I will provide a report from the policy committee. So, the committee on policy met on November 4th and reports that the committee has no action items and 3 discussion items. The committee began the scheduled 4-year review of State Board Policy P5, contracts, grants, and purchases a couple of months ago. The NDE staff has provided background information for the committee regarding analytic information of contracts and grants that have been processed by NDE since 2017. Committee members recommend that further discussion continue in committee and will be placed as a discussion item at the December Policy Committee meeting. The committee began the scheduled 4-year review of State Board Policy P11, Data Access and Use. This policy is for the protection of education records that the NDE has in their possession. The NDE staff will bring proposed revisions to the Policy Committee for discussion at the December Policy Committee meeting. The committee discussed the proposed State Board meeting schedule for 2022. After discussion, the committee recommends maintaining present circumstance by keeping the State Board meeting dates as outlined in B5, meeting the first Thursday and Friday of each month except January, or as otherwise determined by the board. The committee will bring this as an action item to the full board in December. This concludes the Policy Committee report. Board members, is there any discussion on item 6.1A, contracts, grants, and purchases? Seeing none. Agenda item 6.1B. Is there any discussion on it regarding data access and use? Seeing none. Agenda item 6.1C. Is there any discussion on item 6.C, which is the proposed State Board meeting schedule for 2022? Patty.
Just a clarification, because I think it's misleading. The first Thursday and Friday of each month except January, we are not meeting in July. Correct? I mean, that's what our schedule says. So I think each month except July, and then the January is an exception to the,
And that's an exception due to the legislature?
right.
Yeah. Patsy?
And when will we vote on that, or will we vote on that?
In December. It'll be brought as an action item.
Thank you.
And if you will note in your Spark, as you look, there were 3 different calendars, okay? And the committee recommends staying the same. But you will note a footnote at the bottom. If you looked at all 3, it was the same footnote, and that is that we will be looking at going to, I'd like to read it as such. If I can find where, I may not have that with me. That we will work at going to at least two different locations during the year. There will be a selection of 2 different locations, especially since we will not be moved into the new building site till probably next fall, if at all, next year. So at least 2 different locations in Nebraska. Jacqueline?
Just to be clear, 2 locations outside of Lincoln in
Yes,
Nebraska.
outside of Lincoln, yes. Yeah. Like we did when we went to Kearney or to Omaha. Yeah, 2 different locations. Any other questions regarding that item? Patsy?
Do you have any idea where those places will be? Has that been discussed?
No. There was, I know one of the board members, committee members mentioned Scottsbluff and whatnot. It's a long ways out there, they said. But we also have constituents that travel a long ways to Kearney, Lincoln, and Omaha. So, yeah, it will be somewhere. I don't know. Maybe each of us will have to put a name of a city in a hat and we'll draw them. I don't know. Of course, a lot of times it's going to be location, being able to locate a place. Okay. That concludes the Policy Committee report. Okay, agenda item 6.2. Robin, can you provide a report from the Legislative Committee meeting?
Yes, Madam Chair. The committee met in a very brief but very productive meeting. Many good questions answered and brought forth. Some highlights. It was great to meet Lane Carr, not that we've never met him before, but in his new position as working with the Legislative Committee. In his presentation, which he had to abbreviate because of previous discussions, which were very, very important, he talked to us about not only that we have legislative priorities and regulatory priorities, but he outlined how we were progressing on each of those areas. So that was really exciting. And also, he emphasized, and we've had some discussions and some great questions about ESSER funding from the committee, or excuse me, from the full board. But Lane put together how ESSER funds are being used for legislative purposes. And we don't just have those legislative priorities and regulatory priorities, but we are making progress on those. And thank goodness for ESSER funds, which allows us to really not only talk about it, but actually make it happen. So 2 things there. It was great to have Lane there, and we look forward to his continued attendance. And the other thing is the progress that we are making on those issues. Just so you know, if you want to find them, it's not in this particular part of Spark, but if you go to Spark and look for the legislative area, all of this information is there for you to look at. In other words, it talks about the progress that we're making in each of those areas. So I just encourage you to try to get to Spark in the committee area and look for the legislature, and you'll see the presentation that Lane made to us. The other thing, and we had some great questions about, okay, NDE works with the legislature. Do we work with any other agencies that are out there? And are we working with them for our legislative priorities and our regulatory priorities? And we heard from Brian and Lane again about all the work that is being done. Not things that we see, but we know that they are working with the alphabet, I'll call it the alphabet group, NCSA, once you start doing this, I know I'm going to forget a lot of them, but NSEA, Nebraska School Boards Association, I can't think of some of the others, so if you guys have anything that you think needs to be highlighted from any of those groups, it was really encouraging for us to hear the work that the commissioner is doing, the work that Brian is doing, and I'm sure then the work that Lane will be doing. And hopefully we'll get to be involved in that too as legislative meetings. I have 3 other members, so I'm going to turn it over. I see Deborah has some comments that she would like to make, and I look forward to hearing from any of the other members and really questions from those not on the committee.
Thanks, Robin. I always appreciate our discussions, and we're excited to have even more people involved in the policy discussions. It is such an important part of the work that we do, and times have changed considerably because we are in an information age that's working differently than it used to in the past. And keeping our state senators, just like we have an obligation to our constituents, they have an obligation to their constituents. And so it isn't just about informing a state legislature or a state senator anymore. It's really about we need processes to inform their constituents so that they can be accountable. And so there was a very good discussion about, now that we're in this new age of, where there's a lot of misinformation out there that is going to affect public policy and already has, what is our responsibility in making sure that there is good education out there around issues that we want to advocate for in regard to our students and our teachers and our school districts. And I hope that is a conversation that continues, and our partners are going to be a very important part of that. But we do have an obligation to make sure that people have correct information, and I think that it's been easy for us in past because of the culture of this board, to just assume that everyone understood, and that's not going to work anymore in working with our state legislature. So I'm excited about the future conversations we're going to have about just educating people on important topics. So thank you.
Other board members?
Jacqueline?
So this is just a general question, but I know over the past year, we each probably got some email. And so I was just wondering, as we head into the legislative session going into January, have we started, or will we be starting to work on trying to repair some of those relationships? And if so, do you have a plan, or have you thought about it?
Just thought about it. You are 100% right. We've talked about public relations, or whatever the term, about numerous things, and this is certainly another one to build back that trust, not only with our constituents, but also with the senators. There is no particular plan in place at this particular time, but I'm glad you bring that up, because what we have done in the past is we have tried to meet on a weekly basis during the legislative session, and this would be a really good time here in December and to prepare for that in January. So I really appreciate that suggestion, and we'll have that conversation through a Zoom meeting. Okay, thank you, though. I appreciate that.
Lisa?
In addition to the weekly Zoom meetings that...
You need to speak up closer.
Yeah, I guess. Thank you. Madam President, in addition to that, we also have had guest senators come and visit with us. And so I hope we can even have more of that in the coming year that fits along with our chairs and Jacqueline's comment. So building that rapport and understanding where senators are coming from and they understand where NDE and the board's coming from. It worked well last year, but we need to do that more often, I think.
Patsy?
Well, I believe that we also, Robin, you correct me if I'm wrong, but we went to visit senators. We divided up names and went and spent some time with them in their offices and visited with them. And I think that's a really, really good thing, because then not only do you know them, you know their staffers, and they remember you when you go back. And so that's a good way to build relationships.
And I believe you took a niece, nephew,
I took my granddaughter.
granddaughter. Okay.
And she found a new hero who, well, first of all, the staffers all know her by first name. And she found a new hero, Patty Pansing Brooks, who invited her into the main office and gave her candy and a dream maker that she had got from one of the reservations, and she gave it to McKenna and told her the story of it. And so now when McKenna sees her, she runs and jumps in her arms. So she's got a vote there for eternity.
Thanks for sharing. Anything else? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Agenda item 6.3, the Commissioners' Appraisal Committee. The Appraisal Committee did not meet, therefore there is no report from the Commissioners' Appraisal Committee. Agenda item 6.4, Lisa, would you provide a report from the AQuESTT Teaching, Learning, and Service Domain Committee?
Yes, Madam President. We met this morning,
Can you
and
speak into the microphone
I'll
better?
try. Sure. There we go. Is that
Thank
better?
you.
All right. The Teaching and Learning Committee heard a report from staff on the process to review the Nebraska mathematics standards. Over 130 Nebraska educators applied to be a part of that revision team. NDE staff are working to finalize the list of revision team members prior to the first revision meeting, and that's going to happen on November 20th. Public input survey 1 will close next week. This is an opportunity to provide input on the current mathematics standards. The committee also received an update from the NDE staff on the career and technical education and the future potential rule revisions in relationship to that. And we also talked about, and I need some guidance on this from you, Madam President, or maybe Ryan. We also talked about presenting a resolution in support of teachers, and I'm not sure, and we were targeting December. And
Yes.
so did we want that on record this month?
That's fine.
Okay, so we'll vote on it tomorrow?
No, we'll vote on it. We're not going to take any action on it this month, no.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, I thought you were just including it in your report.
Well, I was, and then I got to thinking about the process, and so we're looking at December. Okay.
Yes. Is that it? Yes, ma'am. Okay, any questions?
I have a quick question.
Jacqueline?
So earlier when we kind of talked about standards processes, I remember you had mentioned that there was a time in the past where staff had come and presented to the board what the process was going to be and kind of the outline of what they were going to follow, what the experts would be. I don't know if hope I'm not misquoting you.
No.
And so as you talked today about the math standards being updated and how we're about to start going through that process, was that information kind of presented to your committee, or will that information be presented to the full board? Do we receive it through your committee? Kind of what's that process looking like right now as we start to embark on a new standard or updating or revision of a standard?
I know that Corey Epler has 2 documents in our committee meeting that you could look at. And I know that they're going to be working on the revision starting the 20th. And so if Corey would like to answer, he can give you more specifics.
There we go. Our hope is that the document that is in Spark for the full board, what we're doing is kind of compiling a running update. So it includes the update to committee from last month as well as the committee this month. Our hope is that we would be able to come back to the full board with a presentation in December as we have more information about the who, the what, the when, and some of those other pieces.
Any further?
Does that document include an outline of the process?
No, it does not. It includes the steps that we've taken thus far.
Thanks for the question.
Any other questions for Lisa? Thank you, Lisa.
Thank Corey for coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. Okay, let me see here. Just give me a second here. Okay, we are on agenda item 6.5, student success and access. Hold on one second. Yeah. Patsy, do you have a report for us?
A bit of a report, yes, I have. Okay, so the student success access and support domain this morning. And we did not have a discussion of 6.5A Leading for Equity and Excellence program LEAP because there is no new information on that this month. So there was also not a discussion of that. We did have the pleasure of meeting our new staff member, Kristen, I think if I got her name correct. So she came and joined us. And then we also had a staff member from SPED that came and talked to us about Rule 51 and an item on the consent agenda. And it concerns transitions for students and when they start preparing for the transitions from school to employment or to the workplace. And this was an interesting opportunity for us because it was brought to us a couple of years ago, and so it's finally come full circle. So that was great. And it changes the date, the age of when students will start preparing for their transitions. And before it was age 16. And so by the time some of them got approved for that, they would be 17 years old. And that's not enough time to prepare a transition for a student to go from school to the workplace. And so it's now going to be 14, age 14. So some will actually start preparing for that when they're 13. And so it was really wonderful to see that come full circle back to our committee. Then, lest you think that we were quiet after that, that's not the truth. The three committee members that were there had a discussion of the health standards process that also lasted clear through lunch, well, almost all the way through the lunch when we weren't eating pizza. And I was really, really proud about the discussion and how everybody was very open and said what they were going to say, and thankful for Jacqueline taking notes and presenting. So that ends my summary of our meeting today.
Okay. Any questions for Patsy or her committee? Thank you, Patsy.
You're welcome.
Okay, agenda item 6.6, the Budget and Finance Committee, and I will provide that report for you. It's a short one. The committee discussed each item on the consent agenda, making sure that all committee questions were answered. NDE staff was on hand to answer questions and provide more detail when needed to ensure that committee members were comfortable with the consent agenda items. After each consent agenda item was discussed and corresponding questions answered, the committee was in support of all of the consent agenda items that you've actually all voted on already. And also the monthly board travel expense report was discussed, as well as the in-state travel authorization. That concludes my report. Any questions? Seeing none, we will move on. Agenda item 6.7, the Strategic Planning Performance and Improvement Committee did not meet this month. Therefore, there's no report from the Strategic Planning Performance and Improvement Committee meeting. Agenda item 7, additional business. Pursuant to Board Policy B9, I move to limit public comment at the Friday, November 5th, 2021 meeting to end by 4:00 p.m., where each person may address the board for up to 2 minutes. The board may take a 45-minute lunch break announced at a time prior to recessing. Is there a second on my motion? Patty, you second?
Second?
All right. Discussion, I'll just start with, I think it's important that we have this ready to go for tomorrow so that the public knows how much time that they have and how long we will go. I just need to hear, we need discussion around anything that's in the motion. And I'll read the motion one more time so everyone has it, if that's okay. Limit public comment to end by 4:00 p.m., where each person may address the board for up to 2 minutes. The board may take a 45-minute lunch break announced at a time prior to recessing. Robin.
Do you believe that this is consistent with what we have done in the past?
Yes, I believe it's consistent, because what I have heard and what I had to leave early last month, and what I heard in discussion was that, when we brought up the public comment, you didn't know what the agenda items were or any of that, or the topics that might be wanting to be discussed. So I believe this is consistent. The one thing I heard was that, they want to hear from everyone that comes. They want to ensure that there is time for everyone that comes. Deborah.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in our Student Success Committee meeting today was, what were some of the positives of the health standards? And I think our group felt like we were proud that we did spend a lot of time in listening to the public and not really limiting, except for some common sense things that we needed to do, or we would have been spending the night here. And I enjoyed and appreciated our discussion last month, where everyone again validated the fact how important public comment was, and I certainly am a strong advocate for that as well. And so I appreciate that that's going to be continued, and that is one of the values that we all have sort of, I guess, agreed on by this statement. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing none, the motion, pardon? Oh, Robin, I'm sorry.
No, I just kind of snuck in there. We've had some discussion in here about the actions of the Board of Regents. And I would just like to know if this discussion is to continue indefinitely. Is there ever a time, because I don't believe that the Board of Regents handles their discussion in this way at all. And I'm not saying that we have to be the Board of Regents, but I know that we have used them as an example on more than one occasion. I guess I'd just like to hear what the Board of Regents does in this particular area, or if there are other groups out there that would be the same as us, so to speak, and what some of their actions have been. I too agree with what we're saying about if people want to show up, we want to listen to them. I'm just wanting to know if there are other options for us, if this continues on indefinitely, infinitely.
Deborah, did you want to share something?
Sure, since my emails may have spurred that question, since I did write about it quite a bit, and I also called a number of Board of Regents within the last 6 months, just because it's no surprise, since we never had a written down process for approving standards, and we knew at the beginning that our process was failing, I was, throughout the last 6 months, looking for better ways for us to conduct our business and do our work and make sure that we were basing information on fact and science and medicine, but at the same time also listening to the values of our parents. And the board, what I learned is that the Board of Regents, at least when I had these conversations 3 or 4 months ago, their policy was to only spend 30 minutes in public comment at any meeting, no matter what. Now, they of course broke with that when they when they reviewed the CRT resolution, and like I was advocating that we would do with our health standards because of the toxicness of the topic, they also broke with other ways of doing their business, and they had 2 committees reviewing the topic. But I do think that I've never advocated, even though I gave that example, it was really mostly out of, I thought it was important that they had 2 committees reviewing a controversial topic and that they included all of the board members. What I've always believed, even though I know that was their policy, I've always believed that it is important that we do listen to our parents. But I also have had the question of, when there is clear misinformation, what is our ethical, moral responsibility in weighing that? And I'll use an example that I hate to even throw out there, but I heard a lot of people talk about pedophiles being the same as gay. And that is, I believe we have an ethical and moral responsibility to make sure that people understand how inaccurate that information is. It was also, for me, very strong evidence about how important our health standards are, that here we are in 2021, and people still have that kind of thinking. And so I guess when you talk about public testimony, it is incredibly important that we listen to our parents. I have had many town halls with my parents over the last 6 months. I respond to most every single email that I receive. I've gone to coffee with a ton of constituents. The parents are an important part of the work that I do. But also, I guess, where is the line? What is our moral and ethical responsibility about facts? And that's where I think we still have some work to do about that, because the way the health standards went, it looked like we gave a lot more weight to some of this information that wasn't facts than to the National Pediatric Physicians Association. And so where is that middle ground? It's not a politically smart thing for me to do, to ask those questions. No good politician is going to ask those questions because they're not popular. But I hope by now everyone realizes I am not a politician. I am a person who cares about all of the students in Nebraska and they're being successful. Just like all the parents that we've heard from as well. I know they care as much. I validate all the concerns that they have, and at some point I hope our new process is about facts, science, and information, and helping to alleviate some of the fear that has caused a lot of challenges in this process. Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I know what the question was.
I might have gotten
Just a thought.
Okay.
You know, we're having an ad hoc committee, as we should, about process. Does this board feel that we need to maybe look into this a little bit more and develop something other than and I understand it's what we do, but you know, month by month we pass a similar type of motion, and we really, in my opinion, I don't give it a lot of thought. I ask the same question: is it consistent with what we've done in the past? But does it really address I guess the issue about public comment? So I'm just throwing that out there, and obviously.
I would just like to address, Robin, what you stated. I think we're off topic. I think we need to talk about what the motion on the floor is right now. I believe that can be part of a conversation for the good of the order, perhaps. But and I want to add, I want a piece of clarification from Deborah on the 30 minutes with the regents. As I understand the regents, they, and I may have this very wrong, they have done public comment every time they have a different topic brought up. They have up to a 30-minute public comment time, so that could happen 2 or 3 different times during the day, but we're getting a little off topic right now for that part of it, but could you clarify that, Deborah, for me?
I talked to the attorneys, one attorney for the Board of Regents who handles their board issues, and 2 board members, and my understanding was that at a normal board meeting, that it was a 30-minute public session, but there were also exceptions to it for special topics like they did for CRT. That's all I know.
Okay. Brian?
So the Board of Regents, by their own rules, sets 30 minutes total for public comment. They have a number of other items in their rules for public comment. So, but the difference is your bylaw has no limitation on the total amount of time you will spend on public comment when the board meets, which is why at every meeting you have to decide whether you want to limit that because you've constructed the bylaw to have no limitation. In response to what Mrs. Neary has asserted, what happened, I believe, at the Board of Regents meeting is a board member there moved to grant more time than 30 minutes, which the Board of Regents voted on and granted in that situation. So the way your current bylaw is written, the only limitation is 5 minutes per person. So your unlimited public comment time of your meeting is your bylaw and your standing practice. I am sure staff and I can research and review numerous other public bodies as to how they go about doing that, and Ryan may have more of that because he's looked at all of this, but since this is something the policy committee is responsible for reviewing, maybe you want to consider having the policy committee work on this if this is an ongoing issue. But that, in response to the question Mr. Stevens asked, and there would be your answer for the Board of Regents.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan?
May I offer a thought? And so with that Regents model, for example, it gives a signal in terms of planning purposes for what folks might expect that public comment time to look like. And then it gives the board the opportunity to extend that. And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at one time the State Board of Education did have a total time limit on its public comment policy and then took that away. And so I think there'd be a lot of, or removed that to the existing policy. So I do think there would be a lot of opportunity for the policy committee to take a look at some other like boards or even ESUs, school districts, to take a look at what that could potentially be. And I think from one standpoint, it's setting an expectation of, for planning purposes for a meeting and knowing that it could always be extended, right? Whereas when it's wide open, it leaves a lot less for the board and a lot less for the public to know in terms of expectation.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Jacqueline, you had your hand up a bit ago? Not anymore? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. The motion on the floor is to limit public comment at the Friday, November 5th, 2021 meeting to end by 4:00 p.m., where each person may address the board for up to 2 minutes. The board may take a 45-minute lunch break announced at a time prior to recessing. Andrea, please call the roll.
Morrison,
What are we calling the roll for?
On the motion on the floor.
Was it seconded?
Yes, by Patty.
Okay. Yes.
Fricke,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Kojons,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 7.2. Resolution to recognize State Board member Patricia Tim. And I'm going to read this resolution. Whereas Patricia Tim faithfully upheld the State Board of Education oath of office and bylaws and policies. Whereas Patricia Tim contributed to the general supervision and administration of the Nebraska school system. Whereas Patricia Tim fulfilled the policy forming, planning, and evaluative duties of the state schools program as prescribed by Nebraska revised statutes. Whereas Patricia Tim represented the populace of District 5 by executing the powers and duties of the State Board of Education. And whereas Patricia Tim championed early childhood education, was instrumental in revising the Commissioner's appraisal process, and served as chair of numerous committees and as vice president and president of the board. Now and therefore be it resolved that the State Board of Education recognizes Patricia Tim for her service and contributions to the educators, schools, and students of the Nebraska education system. Do I have a motion to accept this resolution?
I move to adopt the resolution to recognize State Board of Education member Patricia Tim.
Is there a second? Patsy?
Second. I
Motion?
second that motion.
Okay. Motion made by Patty and seconded by Patsy. Is there any discussion on this motion of the resolution? I just want to say that receiving Pat's resignation was very difficult for me. But I couldn't talk her out of it. Told her I wouldn't try, but I was going to ask the question. But her presence is missed deeply. But she did call me last week, and I did ask her, "Oh, are you calling to try to get back on the board?" And she goes, "No, I'm just calling to check in." So, yes. Robin?
You will notice that this chair is empty, and that was the chair that Pat Tim sat in. The good news is the right side of my body has much less bruises in it than it had when she was sitting there. She obviously was a very stable force of the committee or of the board.
Indeed, she was. Anyone else? Lisa?
I just wanted to say her, almost said hysterical, but it's historical knowledge that she has is truly going to be missed. She was so welcoming to, when I was on the board. Well, you all were, but Pat was like the motherly one that, made suggestions or knew things that we might struggle with and just had us think about things. And so I really appreciated her as a board member and a friend.
Patsy?
Well, I was going to say the same thing about the historical, memory that she had of things. So I won't repeat that. I'll just say that I'll miss her and miss my conversations with her. And I felt like I learned so much from her in the time that we spent together. And so I'm glad that I got to serve when Pat Tim was on the board.
Anyone else? Patty?
Being new to the board, I didn't have as much opportunity to get to know her as well as many of you did, or to work with her. But in the short time that I did communicate with Pat, I appreciated her expertise. I appreciated her openness to thinking about things in different ways. And in that respect, even not knowing her very long, I too will miss her.
Seeing nothing further, I hope Pat is listening. Okay, Andrea, please call the roll.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Kojans,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 8. 8.1 through 8.3, these items are for our information items and written reports for the board and for our information only. Agenda item 9, good of the order. This section of the agenda is intended for board members to offer informal observations of the work of the state board. Board members may make brief announcements about attendance at future events for the purpose of informing other board members. No business or motions or suggested actions of the board may be offered at this point in the agenda, nor should board members engage in substantive discussion about other agenda items or introduce new agenda items. Does anyone have anything? Deborah?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Brad Dirksen. I have been in the last week, not only the teacher shortage conference, I had lunch with the Dean of Education at Midlands University, Dean of the Education College. I've had a number of conversations with teachers and teacher union staff members just about the teacher shortage. And every one of those conversations included compliments about Brad and how quick and responsive he was for all the suggestions and all the needs of the teachers who may be needing their certification approved more quickly or whatever the case is. And so I just want to give big kudos, Brad. Thank you for representing NDE so well.
Anyone else? Jacqueline?
I didn't get to attend the Teacher of the Year event, but I know Deborah did. And so our new Teacher of the Year is Lee Perez from Omaha Public Schools. I don't know if Deborah might talk about it, but I think it's something worth us discussing and celebrating. I've met him a couple of times and he was amazing, and so I was really happy to see that he was our Teacher of the Year.
I'm curious, may I go?
Yes.
Okay. Which one of the board members was on the selection committee? Oh, nicely done. Thank you, Patty. And I know there's so many good teachers. It's really hard to select. That was my experience. But I am excited that he is Latino. He is an ELL teacher in Omaha. He is, that's it, I had met him before too. I mean, he is just very community involved. And the minute, I mean, he didn't even know he was winning this award, but 2 minutes later, he's giving a speech about teacher shortages. And so I can tell that he is going to be an outstanding advocate for the youth and teachers of Nebraska. So I am really excited about our Teacher of the Year. So.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jacqueline. Did you say yes or no?
No, I said sorry for opening this.
No, it was great because it's probably perhaps an oversight. You normally in this month, November, would have had the Teacher of the Year program recognition. And we did not do that last year. And so right now we are planning a larger event after the first of the year for both the 2020 and I don't know, whatever the years are, Paul Tim and Lee Perez, for their recognition with all of our partners. And so know that that has not gone unnoticed and that we are making plans for that larger event, I think in January maybe. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I just want to add that the entire board is going to be attending the statewide administrators, well, it's the Administrators Association and the Local School Boards Association that goes together to do a statewide conference later this month, and it'll be at the CHI Center in Omaha. And I want to thank those of you that stepped up to the plate to be able to be part of the panel. And I want you to know that, I mean, we're all going to be there, but I intentionally set it up so that there would not be more than 4 board members on the panel because of the concern around having a quorum in the room. It's okay that we're all there at the conference because we've been invited. That's a conference. But the panel will be Robin, Deborah, Lisa, and Patty. I have recorded a welcome, so I will not be in the room. There will be a Zoom recording or whatever we did the other day. And Patsy and I will be at separate meetings during that time. And Jacqueline, I hope if you're there that you will kindly stay out of the room so that we aren't, well, you know, with everything that's gone on, I think it's important that we make sure that we don't have a quorum in the room. And so Ryan will facilitate the meeting. And as I said to Patsy the other day, I said, well, you know, we could sit out in the hall and eat bonbons and just watch everybody. So Jacqueline, you can join us if you want. No, I'll be attending another session. But thank you for all of you for stepping up and attending that. It's a great, great conference for those of you that haven't been there. Okay, anything else? Agenda item 10, adjournment. Thank you for those who attended and in person and who tuned in to the broadcast. It is 5:03. The State Board of Education will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. in this room for a business meeting. We are officially adjourned.